I have 2 o'clock, so I think we can go. Um, I would like to welcome to all and Happy New Year to our students who are on the call. We certainly miss the activity that you bring to the domain and look forward to your return shortly. I am delighted to introduce our Vice Chancellor, Dr. Reuben Brigady, and to thank him for his suggestion that he host this webinar for our spring sport athletes. And it was his suggestion a couple of days ago that he host this webinar for our spring sport athletes and head coaches in advance of his SAA president's call later this evening. Dr. Brigady, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Mark. Ladies and gentlemen, students, families, good afternoon. It's an honor to be with you all today. The reason, as Mark said, that I requested to have this conversation with you is that when we had to make the decision about how we were going to be approaching winter sports, one of the legitimate criticisms at the time was that we did not sufficiently consult students or families or coaches in advance. So I wanted to make sure that we did that. And I also want to give you a sense of where we are in the totality of our of the situation that we face. So where we are at the moment is the following. As Athletic Director Webb said, the SAA conference presidents will be meeting this evening at 6:30 Central Time to, amongst other things, make a decision about how or whether to proceed with spring athletics. I have informed them that it is my view that making a decision now about spring athletics is premature, and that I request that we delay a final decision until February 12th. And we will discuss that motion at the meeting this evening. The reason I have asked for a delay in the decision is that no conference play has even taken place for any of the winter sports in the SAA conference yet. I think the first one is basketball, which is next week, Mark, I think if that's correct. And so it seems to me to be premature to make a decision about spring athletics when we have no idea what resuming intercollegiate competition for our conference will actually look like, because we haven't played any intercollegiate games yet. And it seems to me wise to at least have some of our own data for a few weeks to determine whether or not, for example, the traveling and the close quarter play, close quarter contact that the play involves leads to any increase in the spread of the virus than otherwise would take place or not, which seems to me to be an eminently reasonable thing to want to know before we have to make a call. So I'm hopeful that the majority of my president's colleagues will agree with me, and that we can get some data with which to make some decisions throughout January and early February before we have to make a decision by February 12th, which in my view still gives us a 2-week window before the first sports, which I believe are baseball and softball for the spring, would start playing on February 27th. So that's the first issue. The second is I want you all to hear me loudly and clearly on this. I very much want you to play. I am a huge believer in the value of athletics, in education, in personal formation, and also in community building. I want to find a way for that to be possible, which is why, for the winter sports, for example, we did not vote, contrary to all the disinformation that out there. Sewanee did not vote against our colleagues not to continue with competition. We did not break consensus. We voted to continue. But we had a fundamental but honest disagreement with our peers in which we said that we believe the masking is actually essential for people that are going to be in close contact indoors in the middle of this pandemic. other schools in our conference did not agree with us, which is why we also did not say, well, fine, no sports. We tried to find at least some reasonable accommodation by finding other teams that would adhere to our protocols inside our bubble, with admittedly very limited success. I should also say that my view with regard to spring sports is that it is, if we can figure it out, it is probably worth the risk to allow spring sports to compete without masks because of the nature of the distancing. But what we simply don't know yet is what the disease profile is going to look like, which brings us to the next point. As desperately as everybody wants to play for a variety of reasons, we cannot carry on as if the pandemic does not exist. We are in the absolute worst part of this, and it's still going to likely get even worse before it gets better. Some of you may have seen that the governor of the state of Tennessee, Governor Lee, pleaded in a special televised address from the governor's mansion over the holidays, just before Christmas, for all Tennesseans to stay in place, for them not to travel, for them not to be indoors with anybody that wasn't in their immediate family, and to mask if they had to be in close quarters with people. And so, notwithstanding the governor's also view that sports should continue, it seems in Congress, not only to me, but to all the public health professionals that we are consulting with, to expect people to be able to be in close quarters with each other, indoors, unmasked, if not to be spread of the virus. And that was the basis on which we had a fundamental disagreement with our peers. Now, I've heard some people say, well, why can't you just let this be an individual decision? And the answer is that in the nature of a pandemic, we are all inextricably linked. The actions of any of us impact the actions of all of us. And this is not the flu. It is a deadly, deadly virus that has claimed the lives of 350,000 Americans, and our country leads the world in deaths on this virus. More than twice more deaths than the next two countries combined on the planet. And we are also facing a new mutation of this virus that is at least 50 to 70% more contagious than the variant that shut us down last year. It is so contagious that it has shut down the entirety of the United Kingdom for their harshest lockdown measures since the pandemic began. And our partner lab, Baylor Labs, with whom we are working, which is our testing partner, has confirmed the presence of this mutation now in Tennessee. So we have to presume that this virus is here. The virus will, the mutation of the virus is here, that the more people interact and travel with each other, particularly when they are not taking the very basic public health protocols of masking and distancing, it will spread. And the final item to consider is that at their last meeting on December 8th, the Board of Regents was crystal clear that our number one overriding objective as we approach planning for this spring is to ensure that the University of the South remains open for in-person academic education through the duration of the semester. And every decision that we take must be taken with that objective in mind. So, as I conclude my opening remarks, let me just reiterate that we have not made a decision yet on spring sports. I have asked the SAA presidents to delay a formal decision until at least February 12th. Hopefully we will know tonight if they agree to that recommendation. Assuming that they do, and if we see that through the nature of conference play this during the winter period, that it is indeed possible for teams to travel between states and compete in close proximity without there being any meaningful uptick in the spread of the disease, or without it being an uptick that we are incapable of handling through our normal public health protocols, then I'm completely open to trying to figure out how Sewanee returns to the full conference schedule for the spring. And it's my hope that we'll be able to do so. So with that, I appreciate your listening. I'm more than happy to take your questions.
Vice Chancellor, we have one question from a coach. When do you expect faculty and staff to get the COVID vaccine?
So the state of Tennessee is rolling out vaccination now through public health departments. And at the moment, they are prioritizing people that are over the age of 75 and people that are first responders. So to the extent that we have faculty, staff, and students, for example, students in the Sewanee Volunteer Fire Department, that fall into those criteria, they will be vaccinated. Some already have been vaccinated, and they can expect to be vaccinated within days, if not weeks. I, for example, do not fall into either of those categories. And so broadly speaking, the information we have from the public health department is that universities, meaning staff, faculty, and students that do not otherwise fall into those other categories, are in phase 3 of the rollout, which is not expected to begin until this summer, June, maybe early July. All of which is to say that we cannot reasonably expect that the advent of this vaccine will materially impact how we're going to be approaching our operations this spring. And keep in mind that all the vaccines, the 2 vaccines that are currently approved for use by the FDA in the United States, the Moderna vaccine and the, not the AstraZeneca, what's the other one? Moderna and, forget the other one.
Pfizer.
Yeah, I've had a brain senior moment. Okay, buddy. Anyway, both of them essentially they both require 2 doses. They both require essentially 3 to 4 weeks between doses, and neither of them give full immunity until about 4 weeks after the second dose. So even if we vaccinated everybody on the domain on February 1st when we came here, that you could not expect there to be full immunity in the population until April, which is a month before we're done. And that's not going to happen because the vast majority of people here don't fall into the categories that have been articulated by the Department of Health of the state of Tennessee. The good news is that we can reasonably expect to return to normal based on everything we're seeing by fall of 2021.
Okay. And just a few more questions, Vice Chancellor. Should spring sports assume that we will at best be a conference-only schedule? Might there be non-conference competitions, or would it be just SAA competitions for spring sports?
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I think for me, it's kind of binary. I mean, if we have the data to presume that that we can be maniacal with our public health protocols, both here and especially when we travel, and that we can track and control the spread of the virus in that context, particularly with the new variants, then for me, the only thing that matters are the public health protocols, and whether or not that's against schools that are in conference or out of conference is immaterial. I'll leave that up to the athletic department to decide. Sure. But that's what we're going to be looking for as we make a decision about how to go forward.
Okay. Could you touch on, I had a question, I think, from a student athlete. Do we still have to pay the room and board or get a refund if students show up to play and then the schedule is canceled because of the delay? I know tuition bills, I think, are due on January 15th. And my assumption would be there's no refund, which is one of the reasons we're having this conversation right now about moving forward. But I did have a student ask that question.
Well, that's correct. Let me put my cards on the table and be absolutely clear so you understand where I'm coming from. I am asking for a delay for your benefit to be able to create the possibility that we could play. If I had to make a decision right now based on what we know, I would say that we would pursue spring sports in the same way we're pursuing winter sports, with the one exception that we would not require spring sports to mask during competition, which hopefully would encourage other schools to want to come here to play. But we wouldn't travel, and we would require other schools to adhere to our other public health protocols when they come. And by the way, this all presumes that we are open and we will remain open. As I said during the entire fall, if we see the spread of this disease on this mountain that we cannot stop, I will not hesitate to evacuate it. One of the reasons the governor of the state pleaded with everybody to adhere to these public health protocols is because the state of Tennessee's healthcare system was on the brink of collapse. He said that the state cannot afford in the new year the same surge upon a surge that we saw after the Thanksgiving period, when people traveled and spent time in close quarters with family and friends unmasked. We are not yet through the 2-week-ish period after the new year to understand whether or not people heeded those requests and whether or not the state of Tennessee, the health system of the state of Tennessee, is in crisis. Note what is happening in other parts of the country. In Los Angeles, they are telling paramedics, don't even bother to bring people to the hospital if you, paramedic, not physician, if you, paramedic, think they can't make it because they have to ration here. They are rationing oxygen now. And so that's where we are. I hate it. I hate that's where we are. I absolutely, my heart breaks for the implications of what all this means for your athletic career, but that is the reality that we are facing. And I'm trying very, very hard to figure out how we thread a needle while also keeping our community safe. And my hope is that we'll be able to do so once we have more data available.
Thank you. I think there are like 3 or 4 questions that have come in. I think you answered it in your previous reply about if the SAA does not delay a decision on spring sport play. We know where we are. We know what we're headed. Okay, but thank you very much. One of these, for me, what will the locker room situation look like from student athlete, I think, and we'll do something like we did in the fall about lining things up. It's going to be a little more challenging because we do have some fall winter sports that have some things scheduled, but we're still going to do the same thing with the Fowler Center. So that may open up some other opportunity in the larger locker rooms. So we're working on that feverishly to make sure that works out. And the final one, Vice Chancellor, about fans. Would parents be permitted to come to home games matches given we continue to play in the spring?
Well, I will tell you the SAA announced their policy today with regard to spectators in conference sports. And their answer is no. Nobody gets to attend conference sports as spectators other than students, faculty, and staff of the institutions. And that it's up to each individual institution to figure out how many can be accommodated given those circumstances. So if that is the case, and we play conference play in the spring and they stick with this, if they stick with the same policy, we'll follow that policy. If they don't follow that same policy, I simply don't know what our answer is going to be. I mean, it could be anything from no to yes, but we will be enforcing masks in the stands. And if you don't want to wear a mask, respect that, then don't come see in person. At a minimum, that's what it will be. The notion that we're going to pack our stands with people that don't want a mask is simply not going to happen, not while we have this pandemic.
And the other addition is that everything that we do will be video streamed free of charge. So anyone can see it via SewaneeTigers.com. All right, Vice Chancellor, I think that's all the questions. Any closing comments?
Sure. Let me just reiterate that I know this is incredibly challenging, incredibly disappointing, particularly for those of you who are in spring sports. And I'm keenly aware that if we don't have a full season or any season at all, that you will have been impacted twice, both last year and this year. It is a tragedy. It absolutely is. And we're trying everything we can to be able to address it. But we have to follow the science, And quite frankly, and I will say something that I've said to many times on many other issues, I know what other schools may be doing, but I am not accountable to other schools. I'm not accountable to the NCAA. I'm not accountable to the SAA. I am accountable to our Board of Regents for keeping our community safe. And our situation is simply different from other schools. Some of that is positive, some of it is less positive. But I take that responsibility incredibly seriously, and we will do our dead level best to figure out how we can return to play safely.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor, for your time and for your suggestion and to meet with our spring sport coaches and athletes. To everyone listening, thank you for joining us today. Happy New Year to you all. We can't wait to have you back. And yay, Sewanee's right. Thank you much.
Thank you.